It is such a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. And to meet you too. I've heard your voice so much. Wow.
Leanne, how do you feel now that you've had a day or so to think about your email and the concept of being on the show? Are you still good with that?
I am. As I said, as soon as I pressed send, I thought, oh, what have I done? And then I thought, I'll probably never hear from you. But I'm in a really good place. Like, a couple of years ago, I would have been doing it because I wanted people to see how much pain I was in, maybe get some confirmation, some empathy, sympathy from people. But now it's not about that. I really want to change people's perception of victims, stop victim blaming, start believing and understanding why we can't talk about it straight away and all of that stuff.
Yeah. Spot on. That is great. Welcome, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast, coming to you from the Podvlog studio in St. George, Utah, and produced by Markel Consulting, LLC. I'm your host, Dave Markel. Hello, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. Last week, during my introductory monologue, I sent out an invitation for you, my listeners, to be a guest on this show. I'm sending out that same invitation right now. If you are a victim or survivor of rape or sexual assault, or actually any type of interpersonal violence, I want to talk to you about the possibility of being a guest on this podcast. Start by emailing me at davemarkel@gmail.com. That's DAVEMARKEL@gmail.com, and let's discuss the possibility of you sharing your story on this show. This is episode 30, and my guest this week is Leanne Cameron, and she did exactly what I'm inviting you to do. She emailed me and briefly told me her story of being raped from the ages of 10 through 13 years old by her mother's boyfriend. After reading Leanne's story, I emailed back to her, and a discussion ensued. The rest of this story is this week's episode, so I won't waste any more time talking about it. I'll just let you listen in for yourself. Here's Leanne. Leanne Cameron, thank you so much for agreeing to be a guest on Sexual Assault Survivor Stories. It's a real honor and pleasure to have you with me.
You're very welcome, Dave.
By way of some background for my audience, I had, in my last episode, invited any of my listeners to reach out to me if they were interested in telling their sexual assault story. And Leanne is one that did that. She emailed me and told me she was interested in talking to me and being on the show as a guest. And we've talked a little bit, and I am very excited and happy to move forward and have Leanne as a guest. Leanne, let's give the audience a little bit of background. Tell them a little bit about yourself.
Right. So I live in New Zealand. That's my accent is probably coming through. I live near the top of the North Island. I'm 54 and I have 2 adult-ish children trying to be adults. I don't have grandkids yet. I work in administration. And the reason I reached out, I'm on what I think of the other side of my trauma. I've done a lot of healing. I hear so many comments from people that need to change. I want to help change people's perception of victims, why they can't talk about their experience, and just change some of that stigma around sexual assault.
Exactly. And that's a perfect word for what is going on in the world with the issue of sexual assault and rape, is that stigma. And it's one of the reasons I started this podcast, is to help people recognize that a stigma is something that we can get past. And actually, if we do the right things, start by believing, tell our stories, do whatever we can to stop perpetrators in their tracks, educate our youth on keeping their own bodies safe, we can change what's going on in the world. It's exciting, Leanne, that you agreed to be here with me. I think you're extremely brave and courageous, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate you reaching out to me. What are you able to tell us about your sexual assault?
I had a normal childhood with a mum, dad, and my sister. We did all the things that normal kids do. So I had a little bit of a grounding in normal relationships. When I was 10, my parents split up and my dad moved away and my mum got a boyfriend. He was a very, very clever narcissist who got into our lives and moved in. Everybody loved him. He was friendly and fun and loving and caring, and at the time we didn't realise, obviously, grooming us. So our lives sort of joined in with his and turned into a chaotic mess of parties, alcohol, and sexual, emotional, physical abuse.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
What are you able to remember, Leanne, about that grooming process? Are you able to tell us a little bit more about how that came about?
Yeah. My dad was really, really lovely, but he was a very busy man. So we didn't see a huge amount of him. So and I'll say the guy's name because I need to say his name out loud. When Ross came in on the scene, to us, he was really friendly and really wanting to get to know us and spend time with us. So there was a lot of talking, there was a lot of games, a lot of play, things that our dad didn't have time to do. So obviously we thought he was wonderful and amazing. But he very slowly, it's got friendlier and friendlier. He also very subtly manipulated the three of us to be separate. So we started to see our mum in a different light because of how he was talking about her. Obviously, that was so that we wouldn't want to go and talk to mum. Yeah, and of course, all my mum's friends really, really liked him. And so I thought that this was all normal until he went a bit further. Yeah, so we, part of our, became a ritual was our house had a bath. We didn't have a shower. He would come in and, scrub my back. I would do that to him when he was having a bath, and then it didn't take that long and I find that I'm on the floor and there's been penetration and he's apologising to me. Sorry, that wasn't meant to happen. I'm in love with you and I couldn't help it. I was 10.
Wow.
Yeah. That was the first time, and it went on from there. I did not really understand what had happened. Obviously, very confusing. Thought he loved me, so maybe this is what we are meant to do when we're in love.
I am so sorry that happened to you. As you said, you have gotten to a point where you are past the issue of not talking about it, and obviously are doing a very good job of talking about it as we sit here. But surely that brings up a lot of emotional trauma in relating that. Are you able to talk a little bit about that trust factor and how that confusing issue that you just mentioned, you're talking about him telling you he loves you, yet doing something to you that I think must have felt so very intrusive.
Yeah, it was definitely very confusing. I mean, I'm at an age where you trust adults. You are meant to trust adults. Yes, he told me he loved me and was in love with me. So it was extremely confusing and I didn't know really what had happened. It just ended up all in my head. So I was just thinking and I could not. I actually did go into that freeze moment, which I didn't recognise until years later. So that was my first experience of freezing and having the moment of going, what the hell is going on?
Yeah, for sure. Help me understand how you reacted emotionally when it was over that very first time.
I can't remember a huge amount. I think from that point onwards, I had sort of disassociated from my feelings. Yeah, I actually don't recall very much apart from just that confusion and also then feeling quite isolated because I didn't feel that I could talk to anyone. I couldn't work out what had happened, so how could I tell someone what I don't understand? Yeah, it did feel very isolating and confusing. Yeah.
What did you do with that?
I just carried on and did what I was meant to do. Went to school and learned to differentiate between the different, like being a school person, being with my friends, being with my mum, and then being with him. And I think I just segregated it all and tried my best to do what I was meant to do.
When you talk about separating and segregating those lives, your life with your mom, your life with your friends, your life with him, are you able to distinguish for us how you were able to facilitate making those switches?
That's a good question. And I'm not sure. I think it just came naturally. No, I'm not sure, and I can't really remember thinking about doing that or how it came about. I think it was just a coping skill. No, it's a really good question. I'm not sure.
Are you able to describe your emotional feelings when you weren't with him, but thinking about him and those experiences?
I don't recall a huge amount, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I remember enjoying school. I remember I also loved to dance. I was learning tap dancing, so that was a bit of an outlet. I remember using those as a way of being myself. And then when I was with Ross, it was a role that I played. I did what I presumed I was meant to do to keep him happy. And then at school, I could be myself, really.
Yeah. Oftentimes our minds block out so much of traumatic issues, traumatic experiences. But do you remember if it had an impact on your relationship with your mom?
No, it did not. I always had a good relationship with my mum, but she is slightly distant. She's not a really emotional connection person. She's not a really maternal mum. She's really good and lots of fun, but she was never somebody that we really, really talked deeply with or had a real connection. So it just carried on as we normally were. Yeah.
Yeah. Help me and the audience understand a little bit more about what you expressed in your email to me, that eventually this stopped.
Yeah.
Are you able to tell us more about that?
Yeah, sure. I always held on to the hope that somebody would eventually notice, and somebody did. So I recall it very, very vividly. It was just me and Ross in bed. Nobody else was home, and a friend of my mum's visited. We pretended that we were asleep, and she walked through the house, and I presume that she looked in and was not very happy with what she saw. 2 days after that we were pulled out of school and put into foster care. Were interrogated, not told what was going on. We had no idea where Mum was. We weren't allowed to see her. So we had another trauma with all of that. Unfortunately, I was not in a position where I could tell anybody what had happened. They never gave me a safe space. I never felt safe or understood what was going on. We had the worry that because he could also be manipulative and physically abusive, there was the worry that he would take that out on us or on my mum. So I didn't tell anyone what had actually happened. And we moved to live with our grandparents, and they told us to just forget about him and move on. And so we did.
Just hearing that makes quite an impact in terms of my experience with others who've been through this kind of trauma. That must have been devastating for you. By then you were how old?
13 and a half.
13. And you had kept this a secret and were still keeping it a secret.
Mm-hmm.
Help us understand what this did to you emotionally.
It was really hard, but I think I'd kept it secret for so long that I did not feel I could tell anyone. So I just tucked it all away and carried on, like I had been with school and friends. Yeah, to be dismissed like that. And I also think that my grandparents thought that I wanted to be involved with Ross. I have a feeling from the way they phrased it that they thought that some of it was my fault. I don't know. So that I just squashed that all into one big box and put it on a shelf and tried to ignore it for 34 years.
Wow. That is an awful lot to carry.
Mm.
And I'm sure it impacted you in ways that maybe you're not even totally aware of at this point.
Yeah, for sure. It's taken a long time to realise how it has affected me, and what you think is normal behaviour or reaction to normal life stuff is actually not quite as normal for other people. Just very socially awkward. I don't have many friends because I just can't go there. I don't want people to see the real me, especially back then, because, if they delved deeper, they may not like what they saw. So holding on so tightly to all the blame and shame and everything that I tried to hide, certainly did impact and our relationships with people. And
sure. Yeah, that obviously makes perfect sense to anyone who has any idea of what it means to be trauma-informed. And are you able to talk about whether or not there were other symptoms and impacts on your life, things like nightmares, flashbacks, and eating disorders, and, as you've mentioned already, the social problems of just getting close to people is difficult and still is, with great understanding. I certainly understand how it might feel to you to risk letting anyone know this. And yet here you are talking to us and wanting this story out there. Tell us more about the impact, if you're able.
I don't know how, but I didn't end up with any addictions. I haven't done any cutting or anything like that. I was quite mentally, emotionally stable. I think because I locked it all away so much, and because prior to that and then after that, we had sort of a normal childhood, normal family environment, which gave me some sort of stability. But I always found it very hard to advocate for myself. So I'm a yes person. I would say, yes, I'd like to be involved with something and then regret it but then not able to go back and say, hey, sorry, I don't really want to do this, because I don't want to hurt people's feelings. I want people to like me. I had sexual relationships with older men that when I was around 16, 17 that I shouldn't have, but I liked what I had learnt was I felt good when a guy liked me, and that involved sex. But aside from that, I don't know how, but I have not had any addiction or any other issues, which is really quite amazing.
Yeah. What was the environment like in the community you lived in with regard to sexual assault or incest or child predators? Was there a recognition that this was a big problem?
No, so this was the early 1980s, and no, the domestic violence, sexual assault, anything like that was very much hidden. Victims were victimised. I know now that my mum did go and talk to a policeman about the way Ross was treating her physically and verbally, and she was basically told, well, that's what relationships are like. The policeman then went and got Ross and spoke to him, so you can imagine the fallout when Ross got back from that. Mm-hmm. So there was no understanding on sexual violence, domestic abuse. Yeah.
Leanne, are you able to talk to us maybe a little bit about what became of Ross?
Okay. I heard through the grapevine that he moved on and found another family to victimise. He was arrested and unfortunately took his own life before he could be prosecuted. And this was about 8 years later, so I was about 21.
And how did that make you feel?
That was horrible. My first reaction was actually sadness because I wanted to talk to him one day. I wanted to talk to him. I had questions and I had things to say to him, and he's taken that away. And then I was mad. Yeah. And obviously regretted that I never told anyone and put all that blame on myself that he went on to another family.
I'm sorry you put that blame on you. Obviously, it's all on him.
Yeah.
You've made some amazing transitions and realizations through all of this, and I'm really curious to know how that all transpired. How were you able to get to the point where you are here telling your story?
Good question. I've always been interested in how people think. So I've always sort of looked a little bit at psychology and trying to understand how somebody could perpetrate. I'm trying to understand domestic violence so I can understand why our mum didn't do anything, why she didn't stop what happened. So just trying to get all of that. And I did realise that, tried to understand that it wasn't my fault, but it's easy to say that and it's easy to go, yes, I know it's not my fault, I was a child, all of that. But really, really deep down inside, you still blame and shame yourself. So I have been through therapy for about 5 years and have managed to work through that using a whole lot of different therapies. And finally are on the other side where there's acceptance of what happened. I feel that it's part of me now, not a bad part. It's just part of my life's journey. Yeah, I feel okay about what happened and my role in it.
That's amazing. How did this impact your children? Are you able to talk about the relationship between you and your children, and do they know what happened to you as a child?
I have a really good relationship with my kids. We've always had a lot of fun together. I've always been a little bit aware of trying to keep them really safe, but also trying to allow them to be themselves. I didn't want to be smothering them to keep them away from perpetrators. Was, very careful about who they were involved with and who was involved in our life. I have very briefly told them about 3 years ago that I was in therapy and why. So just very, very briefly, I just said to them, if you want to ask any time, we can chat. Yeah.
Leanne, just, for the audience, I'm on a Zoom call, so I can see Leanne. I just have to tell you, your countenance, your willingness to talk, I am just in awe and amazed at your strength and your willingness to talk about all of this. So it's really a pleasure to talk to you, even though the content is so difficult and so life-changing. You're an amazing person for everything that you've endured and now are dealing with and ready to talk about it. Tell me, if you would, what you hope to get out of sharing this story. How do you hope it impacts those who are listening?
Well, the first thing is to know that you're not alone and that there are other people going through this. As I said, I feel like I'm on the other side of my healing journey and that is possible. It was really hard. I did a huge amount of work through that, but at the same time, it was quite an amazing experience to experience, all that healing, that PTSD, the depression, going through everything, what I've learned about how trauma affects you. So I would like other people to know that it is possible to work through it and to actually get to a place where you are comfortable talking about it. It's part of you. The pain is a lot less. It's always going to be there. I'll have my moments, as everybody does, but it's nothing like it was before. So, it is possible to get to a good place.
And do you attribute most of that to the therapy?
Yes, I do. The guidance from my psychologist. I had help from my sister. So after many years of not talking about it, I did go and talk with her. So we've been on this journey together. And I think just my attitude, I'm the kind of person who, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it 110%. Along my healing journey, I thought of things that I thought would help me. So I just went and did them. And one of those was to actually go back to the place with my sister to where it all happened. And we actually managed to go through the house where it all happened, saw it with new eyes. Yeah, visited our childhood friends. I've actually talked to the lady who reported us. That was an amazing, conversation, and to hear her side of what she had seen and heard, and to actually thank her for saving us. I was getting very close to ending it all at that point. Yeah, so she saved us, and she's an amazing lady. Yeah, I found things that really worked for me that I felt I needed to do as part of my healing, and I just went and did it. I'm not sure where I found the strength from, but I just went and did it, and it's paid off.
Obviously, yeah. Congratulations. It's amazing that you are so willing to talk about these very difficult things. We could talk all night, I think, in terms of just some of the things you've said that bring up so many questions in my mind. You mentioned just now that you were close to ending it all. Are you able to tell us a little bit more about that thought process and where you were in your mind, and at what stage of your life did this happen, and what evolved?
So it was during the abuse, during the 3.5 years. There was no way that I could tell anyone. I was so internalized, blaming, shaming myself, the freeze response and all of that. I couldn't physically speak about what was going on. So it was all in my head. And for me, the only way I could end it would be to take my life. We lived very close, 1 street away from a very dangerous beach where you don't swim because there's huge waves and it goes deep very quickly. I don't swim very well. So the thought of being able to do that walk one night to end it all, it sort of did keep me going because I knew I had an out. And at the same time, I was hoping and praying that somebody would realise what was going on. And she did.
Yeah, as you mentioned, that happened. And I'm so thankful for that.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're here with me.
Too.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is so difficult to think about, those thoughts being so overwhelming and so consuming. Wow. I guess what I'm really interested too in hearing now is, how do you see your future? I mean, you've talked to me, you reached out to me in an email. You've been listening to the podcast, obviously, and it's impacted your life. So tell us how you found the podcast and what it means for you to listen to that and listen to these other stories, and how that has impacted you.
I just saw your podcast on Spotify. I'm not sure how I actually managed to see it, and I thought it sounds very interesting. I also was looking at Jan Broberg, so I was listening to her podcast, and I did join Thrivivors, and she's an amazing woman, and that whole forum is amazing. Yeah. I love the way that you talk about trauma and being trauma-informed, and I wish that I had encountered back in 1980. And I love the people that you have had on. It's showing that things are changing. It's changing from talking about victim blaming. It's changing to understanding why people can't leave the situation, and I absolutely love your work, and that's one reason for wanting to be involved. I also, you don't get much opportunity to talk about your experience, so this has just been amazing. I mean, I've only ever talked to my therapist. I've talked only little bits to my kids or other people, and other people get to talk about their things, grief if they lose a parent or someone, you're in a car accident, medical adventures, things. People can talk about that. You can talk about that in the lunchroom at work. You can't just go, oh, hey, actually, I had this horrible event, because people are going to run. Or I have had one person who was talking victim blaming, somebody who was talking about, it was actually to do with Michael Jackson, and she's like, well, why didn't they talk about it when it was happening? And I actually explained a little bit of what I had been through, and these are why you can't. And she just kept talking and kept going on about, no, I wouldn't do that. I would tell somebody. So I really want people to understand why we can't talk. We just can't speak. The shame and the blame that we hold on to, it's so hard to release that. So talking about it is so important.
It really is. And as my story about the beginning of this podcast, the reason I started it being that very thing that you just said, giving people like you who've been through sexual abuse a platform, a way of talking about our stories. I think one of the things you said that impacts me the most, and I'm most appreciative that you mentioned, is letting other victims and survivors know that they are not alone. It is such an impactful and calming realization to know that other people have been through something that you've been through. And it's one of the reasons why in the process of asking people to tell their story, I'm so grateful that people like you, people like my other guests have gotten into detail, because others can then say, yes, that exact thing happened to me, or something very similar happened to me. I'm so glad to know that I'm not alone. So to me, Leanne, your willingness to be here is an impressive and huge impact maker on other people's lives. I want to thank you. Would you be willing somewhere down the line to come back and talk to me some more about this?
Yes, I definitely would be. Yeah.
I am already looking forward to that. Then the other thing, are you able to talk to us about the things that you do that help get you through those rough times?
Yeah, for sure. And yes, I will be thinking about this conversation for quite some time. It certainly does open the floodgates, and I do have a thing where I start to ruminate over and over and pull things apart and obsess over it. What I do, music is a huge thing for me. I love rock music. So I put on my headphones with my favourite music and I dance. So I shake it off and dance and get back into feeling my body and enjoying the lyrics. Music always lifts me back up. Yeah. And I'm having a go at restoring furniture at the moment. So that's another thing that's when I listen to my podcasts and have a go. It just, that sanding process, that making something look new again, just gets me back out of my head, and it's an enjoyable process. Yeah.
Do you have someone in your life that you can call or have come over, talk to on the phone or whatever, that will support you?
Yeah, I've got my sister. So it was a shared journey. Her trauma was a little bit different to mine, but we have reconnected. We support each other. So definitely I'll be contacting her later today.
Awesome. So happy to hear that. Thank you, Leanne. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. See ya.
Bye-bye. That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I want to give a shout out of gratitude to Leanne Cameron for responding to my invitation to be on this show. Leanne's courage and strength resulted in the episode you just heard, and you could be on one of my next episodes. Just email me at davemarkel@gmail.com. That's DAVEMARKEL@gmail.com, and we'll talk about this possibility. I know Leanne's story has resonated with many of you in very positive and educational ways, and I want to thank you for listening in. Please tell everyone you know about this episode and this podcast, and don't forget to rate this episode and subscribe to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. Your rating and subscription help this podcast grow, and you'll be doing your part to help bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault. Another way to do this is to start by believing, because we all know someone whose life has been affected by rape or sexual assault. We'll see you next week.